Welcome to a moment of calm. You don't need to do anything. Just get comfortable. Breathe slowly and let this story gently guide you to sleep. Let us know in the comments how many minutes it took you to fall asleep. Sweet dreams. The 31 most odd and unsettling scriptures in the Bible. Cover to cover, most individuals haven't read the Bible. If you read the Bible in chronological order, chapter by chapter, you will find tales that make you think, beautiful objects, and insightful words. You must put these works of incredibly violent literature by different writers from different languages within the perspective of their own historical times, which are quite different from our own. It is common practice to exclude several of these themes from Bible lectures due to their difficulty in explanation. For what reason was Job allowed to go through such excruciating pain? How can one describe abyss locusts? Can you tell me about the lake of fire? Tell me the horrifying story told by the prophet Isaiah. Were people punished by throwing stones till someone was killed? Just a friendly reminder to subscribe to our channel and turn on alerts so you won't miss a thing when we continue. First, there is the torment of Job. The story of Job begins with a covenant between God and Satan. In this covenant, God allows Satan to destroy Job's life, which is characterized by virtue and piety, so that Job might be tested in his faith. Satan takes all of his possessions from him. God removes his family and gives him a lot of pain, but Job still refuses to blame God, even though he wonders why he continues experiencing poor luck. Between chapters 38 and 42 of the book of Job, God gives Job his last response. Even though he created everything, God is exempt from human law, and he scolds Job for his lack of knowledge during a storm. Even though God never explains to Job why he allowed him to suffer, he rewards his faith with twice as much as before, including a family of 7 boys and 3 girls. There are 2 hands. The second one writes on the wall, while his father, Nebuchadnezzar, had stolen silver and gold cups from the temple in Jerusalem, King Belshazzar of Babylon prepared a sumptuous banquet for 1,000 nobles, as described in the book of Daniel. As Belshazzar and his guests, including their wives and concubines, drank from these sacred cups, their gods, gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, were honored. The appearance of a human hand writing on the palace wall startled King Belshazzar. No one among his clever men could decipher the Aramaic text he had sent them. The king's wife turned down the prize because she remembered that the prophet Daniel could decipher this language and had urged him to do so. A prophet interpreted the word Mene Mene Tekel Parsin Kuye, which signifies that the king's days were numbered. After he was judged unfit, the Persians and the Medes would partition his realm. That night, the Persians slew Belshazzar, and Darius the Mede became king of Babylon. Rank 3 is the atrocity against the innocents. The ordering of the massacre of innocent people by King Herod of Judea is widely recognized as one of the worst atrocities recounted in the Bible. Following the birth of Jesus Christ, the wise men from the east saw the birth of a star, which signaled the advent of the Jewish king. Herod, who held this office at the time, was concerned about the potential threat to his power. He dispatched the 3 wise men to Bethlehem, the site of Christ's birth, pretending to be interested in learning more about him, so that they may come and adore him. Nevertheless, The Magi were warned by an angel not to inform Herod. To escape Herod's terrible wrath upon realizing the Magi had tricked him, Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt, as Joseph had been dreamed about Herod's plot. While furious, he issued the decree to kill every male kid in Bethlehem and the neighboring towns who was 2 years old or younger. As a result, every single kid was murdered. The fourth event is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. According to the Bible, God's wayward people lived in the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah. Both are present in Genesis, where the natives are depicted as heartless and merciless. Apart from being materialistic, blasphemous, and unhospitable, they were also not religious. Even though God was already furious with the towns for their repeated offenses, Abraham pleaded with God on their behalf. With 10 upright men in Sodom, God promised he would save the city from destruction. Lot, a resident of Sodom, was bestowed with the guardianship of 2 angels who pretended to be strangers. Once word got out that he had offered them shelter and hospitality, some of the city's other residents set out to take advantage of the visitors. Lot tried to avoid fulfilling his holy obligation to safeguard his visitors by doing whatever he could think of, even providing his daughters as a substitute for the strangers, whom he recognized to be angels. Then the angels showed their true colors, blinded the men, and guided Lot and his family out of the city, making it clear that they were to never return to the mountains. Upon reaching the mountaintop, Lot's wife disobeyed the order and turned to face the city. God descended a cloud of fire and sulfur onto Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying the city, its inhabitants, and all vegetation. A pillar of salt was produced by Lot's wife. In 5th place are the locusts of the abyss. Several events related to the end of the world, as we know, it are detailed in the book of Revelation, which will be fulfilled at the end of time. Among these events is a locust epidemic that, as described in the Bible, looked like horses fit for combat, complete with human faces and glittering crowns. They looked like females and had fangs like lions. They were armored in iron and had tails adorned with stings like those of scorpions. Their wing beats sounded like a legion of war horses and chariots. They were under the supervision of the angel of the abyss, whose Hebrew name is Abaddon and Greek name is Apollyon, meaning destruction. Locusts were supposedly ordered by God to devour any man whose forehead was not marked with the divine seal, according to the Bible. That the anguish will continue for 5 months is confirmed in the scriptures. Number 6 on the list is the Egyptian plagues. There are few instances of divine retribution in the Old Testament as famous as this one. God brought the plagues on Egypt because he was sick of the Hebrews being slaves for more than 400 years. It is in the book of Exodus where the tale is told. During that period, God selected Moses and his brother Moses to lead his people to freedom. After demonstrating his obedience to God's orders, Moses makes an appearance before Pharaoh to explain his divine duty. But Pharaoh of Egypt disregarded Moses' counsel and made things worse for the Hebrew slaves. Then God delivered 10 plagues as an act of demonstration of his might and to bring shame onto the king of Egypt. The first was the contamination of the Nile River, which made it unfit for human consumption. After that, there were frogs, fleas, flies, a plague that killed Egyptian cattle, ulcers and sores, hail with fire locusts, nightfall, and lastly, the 10th plague, which killed every firstborn in Egypt. A single one of these calamities had no effect on the Hebrews. To protect the Hebrew people from terrible destiny, God ordered that their dwellings be marked with the blood of a lamb immediately before death was to come. After the 9th plague, Pharaoh finally let the Hebrews go free. There is Noah's flood, the 7th. This enormous deluge, often referred to as the worldwide flood, is detailed in Genesis. Earth was hostile and polluted according to the biblical tale. Because God saw Noah as a virtuous man, he decided to wipe off the whole population of the ark. He told him to build an ark out of cypress wood so that he, his family, and 2 of every kind of animal could survive. The duty that was given to Noah was finished by him. There was a flood because it rained continuously for 40 days and 40 nights. Even the highest mountains on earth were underwater for 150 days. Every living creature died out except for Noah, his family, and the animals that remained on the ark for the 12 months. Upon their arrival, they found a planet utterly devoid of life. Only at this point in history has God carried out his prophecy to destroy mankind. A divine judgment on Jerusalem is the subject of the 9th. The inhabitants of Jerusalem were under God's fury, as recorded in the book of Ezekiel, due to their persistent disobedience and transgressions. This is how the prophet Ezekiel describes God's warning to the Israelites, that he would gather the inhabitants of the city and, like melting metal in a furnace, consume them in his anger. The divine retribution is described as being annihilated by fire. Intended for the purification of his people, God imposed a severe punishment, like the process of purifying metals in which fire separates the precious from the dross. The crucifixion of Christ is the 9th. All of Jesus' suffering before, during, and after his crucifixion is detailed in the 4 Gospels as the Passion of Christ. Part of the action is going through hell and being punished severely. Jesus Christ, surrounded by his disciples and the Blessed Virgin Mary, was so anxious about his impending crucifixion that he sweat profusely, becoming crimson when he was led before Pontius Pilate and the Sanhedrin. This occurred just before he was betrayed at Jaman. Afterwards, he was flogged with the Roman scourge, a whip made of spherical metal parts and several leather strands. Although it did not immediately kill the victim, it did inflict excruciating agony and serious wounds. Jesus was almost murdered by the lashing because, according to Jewish law, there was a maximum amount of lashes that could be applied to a prisoner before they would die. He was thereafter compelled to carry his own cross, despite the fact that condemned individuals typically merely bore the crossbeam. Afterwards, he was crucified without clothing, an execution technique that often led to death by exposure and days of suffering. Nails hammered into Jesus' heels supposedly increased the suffering to the point that he died within 3 hours of the earlier torment. The most tragic element is not the harsh punishments, but the fact that Christ endured them guiltlessly. A few of verses in the Bible allude to the lake of hell, which is mostly defined as an area of fire in the New Testament, namely in God's revelation to John. Before the end of the world is portrayed as a battle between good and evil, Christians are transported to heaven. The ones who remain and are considered decent are those who become Christians and die as martyrs when the Antichrist comes. Satan uses him and the false prophet as his puppets to dominate his adversaries. It takes the Antichrist 3.5 years to disclose his identity and take over the world. They both get to power in the outset via diplomatic means, At the last battle of Armageddon, the Antichrist will lead the forces of the earth against Jesus and his heavenly army. While Jesus destroys the world with his truth, the Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown alive into the lake of fire. Cast into the abyss, Satan is bound for 1,000 years. After that time, God releases him from prison, but then he destroys him and his companions in the lake of fire. After then, God pronounces his last judgment. The 11th cycle of God's wrath comes to a close with the beheading of John the Baptist in the book of Matthew. Some get to paradise, which is now called the New Jerusalem, while others are damned to an eternity of torment in hell's lake of fire. After King Herod's divorce and remarriage landed him in jail, John the Baptist supposedly chastised him for it. Despite his disappointment, Herod was so captivated by Salome's dancing during the feast that he promised her whatever present she wanted in return. After hearing criticism of her marriage to the king, Salome and her mother were so hurt that they wanted John the Baptist's head served up on a platter. Herod felt an overwhelming sense of need to keep his pledge. Clause 12. The slaughter of infants, as described in the Psalms, is more than a story. Blessed is he who takes your infants and dashes them against the rocks, the fragment says, highlighting a phrase in Psalm 137 that departs significantly from other, more optimistic psalms, conveying a disturbing message across the book of Psalms. The Babylonians, who had enslaved the Jerusalemites, are the intended recipients of this text. If you take the verse at its value, it says to get revenge on the Babylonians. Position 13. Psalms that criticize children are found in the second book of Kings. There are those who think the poem could be referring to a different set of young people rather than children due to translational choices. This would alter the victims, but not the horrible destiny according to these scholars. God supposedly sent 2 bears to kill a bunch of kids who had gathered to taunt the prophet Elisha because they were being so disrespectful. Number 14. In Joram and the cannibalistic mothers. An account from the second book of Kings describes a desperate situation in which 2 women decide to consume the offspring of each other in order to stay alive. But as they devour the first lady's kid, the second woman conceals her own boy to keep him safe. This terrible and unfathomable story is used by the Bible to show King Joram of Judah the gravity of his people's situation during the siege. The 15th beast is the one from Revelation. One of the animals described in Revelation looks like a lion, another like a calf, a third like a man, and a fourth like an eagle. With 6 wings and an abundance of eyes, each of the 4 creatures was always on the go. No matter how you slice it, the depictions of the monsters in Revelation are just terrifying. At Armageddon, the animals gather with the false prophet, but Christ destroys them by casting them into a lake of fire. Story number 16 in the Bible is the Judgment of Solomon, which takes place in the first book of Kings and has the wise king facing a dilemma. When 2 ladies dispute about who is the biological mother of a child, they approach him to mediate. The king takes a surprising decision, since they are both unwilling to abandon her claim. Solomon orders the kid to be split in half, so that each lady may retain her share. The murder doesn't happen because the biological mother steps forward and offers to give up the kid so she may live. Consequently, the monarch found the real answer, but only after seeking a restraining order. 10:17 Zipporah circumcises her son. As recorded in Exodus, Moses' wife Zipporah circumcised her son by severing his foreskin with a sharp stone. Moses is subsequently tossed the skin fragment by her. The story begins as Moses is en route to Egypt to warn Pharaoh of the approaching plagues. Number 18. The vision of Ezekiel bones joined together, bone to bone, while I prophesied in accordance with the instruction. A rumbling and rattling were audible throughout my prophesying. Even though academics have offered a number of interpretations, such as the concept that Zipporah was attempting to save Moses, the raw details in this text nevertheless managed to chill. Divine destiny's fury. The father had neglected to circumcise his kid. Their skin, sinews, and flesh clothed them, yet they were gasping for air as I glanced at them. The vision that the prophet Ezekiel had is described in this chapter of Hosea. Prophecy states that Ezekiel will see a valley of bones transformed into actual people, the Israelites in exile at the time, who would come alive and breathe according to the vision. The most horrifying aspect is the comprehensive description of the formation of sinews and the breath entering the dry bones. Number 19. The decline of Samaria. Hosea foretells doom for mankind that will ensue from their rejection of the one true God. One verse uses Hosea's wife Gomer's infidelity as a metaphor for the Sumerian people's worship of other gods. According to the following prophecy, Samaria will be destroyed by the sword, its pregnant women and infants will be ripped apart, and the land would be left desolate due to its rebellion against God. The chilling tone of that warning doesn't stop Hosea and Gomer from making apologies. In the end, it shows that salvation is possible for everybody if they act right. The maltreatment of Dinah. Number 20. Jacob, the progenitor of the Israelites and the man who would come to be called Israel, had a daughter named Dinah. The people of Shechem were captivated by Dinah when she visited there, as recorded in the book of Genesis. After Prince Hamor's son abused her, he begged his father to arrange their marriage. So that he might ask Dinah to be his wife, Prince Hamor went to see Jacob. Infuriated by the violence and the marriage proposal that followed, Jacob's sons were furious. The men of Shechem consented to the circumcision process, but 3 days later, the city was assaulted by Levi and Simeon, two of Jacob's sons, and all the men, including Hamor and Shechem, were murdered. They had falsely said that they would only approve of the marriage provided the city's males consented to the ritual. Additionally, they destroyed everything they came across while robbing the city of its treasures. In chapter 21, verse 21 of the book of Kings, it is said that the prophet Elijah forbade the worship of Baal, who was the Canaanite deity of rain, thunder, and dew. Elijah was accused by King Ahab of disturbing the spiritual serenity of Israel, and King Ahab supported worship of Baal. In response, Elijah, trusting that Yahweh would help him, accused Ahab of worshiping false gods and questioned their beliefs. King Ahab gathered the Israelites and 450 prophets from Baal on Mount Carmel. For the purpose of sacrificing 2 calves on unlit wood, Elijah and the prophets of Baal proposed that their gods step in and start a fire. The Baal prophets prayed fruitlessly throughout the day. After then, Elijah wetted his altar to make it ready. Upon calling upon Yahweh, fire came down from heaven and consumed the offering. The Israelites followed Elijah's orders to seize and kill all of Baal's prophets when they were convinced that Yahweh was the true God. A Levite and his wife, verse 22. The book of Judges details the plight of a Levite and his concubine. While going, they stopped at the Benjamite area of Gibeah in the hopes of being welcomed. No one came over to help them, so they stayed in the public plaza. The old guy finally invited them to remain at home. Several persons who intended to abuse the Levite soon thereafter visited the elderly man at his home and insisted on speaking with him. The elderly man offered his daughter and the Levite's concubine as substitutes for himself, since men's honor was more highly esteemed than women's. During the concubine's breakdown outside the door, during a night of mistreatment at the hands of Benjamin's soldiers, the Levite attempted to instigate revenge by slicing her corpse into 12 pieces, which he then distributed to the 2 Israelite tribes. The approval of slavery is number 23. In addition to the famous 10 Commandments, the book of Exodus also details rules regarding buying and selling people, and how slave owners should behave their employees. One section of this text states that a master will surely face penalties if a slave dies while being beaten, but no consequences if the victim survives for a few days after the assault. The Bible has long been used in defense of slavery on the grounds that it is both morally permissible and shown in a positive light in the Bible. Number 24, the persecution of non-believers. Anyone who preaches the worship of other gods must be immediately beheaded, as stated in a chapter of Deuteronomy. In Numbers, we see this instruction put into practice as God commands Moses to wipe out a whole country whose citizens reject his faith regardless of whether they are friends, brothers, wives, or children. After capturing the women and children and slaughtering every male in the kingdom with his army of 12,000 soldiers, Moses is furious. He then orders the execution of all inmates, with the exception of the virgin girls and women, who will be enslaved. This is the 25th narrative of the Ark of the Covenant's demise in the Old Testament. A golden box called the Ark of the Covenant held the sacred stone tablets that bore the 10 Commandments of God. It would seem that the Ark is merciless in its destruction of all it crosses in the book of Samuel. Every one of the 70 witnesses who were there as the Ark of the Covenant was being carried through a city was murdered by God. Subsequently, the most controversial death occurs while the Ark is being pushed by a cart drawn by oxen, and one of the oxen stumbles, almost causing the Ark to crash. As soon as it starts to descend, God immediately kills the guy called Uzzah, who is trying to catch it. Position 26. As a kind of punishment, the Bible depicts a number of odd and horrific ways of execution, some of which are more common than others. One of them, and maybe the cruelest, is stoning, in which a mob of people throw stones at a condemned person until they die. The book of Deuteronomy outlines some situations that necessitate the use of stoning. As an example, it states that any wayward son will be stoned by all the males in this city. It says that if a man can't establish that his wife was anything other than a virgin when they were married, then the lady would also face the same penalty. 27. Repercussions for offenses committed by third parties. Even though there are many examples of consequences for following God's instructions in the Bible, there are also cases when individuals are punished because of the transgressions of others. The Bathsheba narrative, found in Samuel and Kings, has many disturbing aspects, but the most uncomfortable is the person who God punishes because of them. King David's obsession with Bathsheba began when he saw her bathe and continued when he demanded she return to his presence. It was Uriah who wed Bathsheba. 9 months after that, she gave birth to the son of King David, albeit what happened after that, and whether or not it was voluntarily, are also unknown. It was in the midst of a brutal battle that Uriah and a widow called Bathsheba met their demise. After David's murder of Uriah and subsequent dealings with Bathsheba, who was already married, he was allowed to marry her as a form of revenge. Death befell the boy whom God had carried with her. Animal slaughter is at number 28. 2 men plagued with demons were standing in the way of 2 groups of pilgrims from the surrounding area when Jesus arrived, as told in Matthew's Gospel. If Christ was going to cast the devils out of the men's bodies, they begged him to at least cast them into a neighboring herd of pigs. Curiously, Jesus granted their request, casting out the devils from the 2 men and casting them into a herd of pigs, who tragically fell down a cliff and drowned in the lakes below. On the list of 29 is despising one's own relatives. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus says that his disciples must leave their family behind, even rejecting their parents, wives, and children. Anyone who doesn't hate their own life, spouse, parents, children, and siblings isn't fit to be my disciple. Furthermore, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says that losing a part of one's body is better than being sent into hell, and that his disciples may have to disfigure themselves if they offend because of any part of themselves. 30. Jonah and the fish were sent by God. After Jonah became aware of Ni's wickedness, God tried to convince him to preach against it, as told in the book of Jonah. Jonah, who was not thrilled with the prospect, tried to flee from God aboard a ship bound for Tarshish. Unfortunately, Jonah was never able to reach his goal since the ship was sunk by a storm. Jonah was tossed into the water by the sailors in an effort to calm the storm. God sent a great fish to swallow Jonah as a cruel punishment for his disobedience. Jonah remained inside the belly of the fish for a duration of 3 days and nights. 31. The treatment of female characters in various narratives. Doubtful narratives that portray women as subservient to males and much diminished in importance serve to highlight the Bible's perspective on women and their place in society. For example, the biblical law states that a woman is deemed unclean if she has a son. God says it will take 33 days for the infant to be cleansed, but if it's a female, it will take twice as long. The new mother also has an additional obligation to deliver sacrifice animals to her priest for the purpose of atoning for her transgressions. When it comes to the regulations of Deuteronomy, they are considerably worse. Any man who harms a virgin must pay a fee to her father and then remarry her without the option of divorce. Every event in the Bible has a purpose, even if it may seem meaningless and disturbing to us moderns. They teach us lessons, show us how strong God is, and emphasize the importance of trusting in and following Him. Even though it's hard to fathom, the morality that governs most of the Western Hemisphere is deeply rooted in Judeo-Christian culture, which includes the inexplicable practice of brutal punishments and unjust trials of innocent people. We hope that this video has been of some use to you. Feel free to provide any more details you may have in the comments area. Help spread the word about the 31 most strange and scary Bible verses by giving this video a thumbs up and sharing the link with your friends and family. You can find all of our social media profiles listed in the description below. So if you're new to our channel, be sure to subscribe and follow us. Remember that history repeats itself of those who don't know their own history.